Welcome back. Tonight, we're venturing into the dark heart of Africa's spiritual world, where gifts aren't gestures of kindness, they're weapons of destruction. Where accepting something as simple as a bracelet, a medicine bottle, or even money from a stranger can mark you for death. We're talking about a continent where the line between the physical and spiritual worlds doesn't just blur, it disappears entirely, where traditional healers wield power that Western science can't explain, and where curses aren't just superstition, they're documented reality that kills with terrifying efficiency. These aren't stories from ancient times. These are events happening right now, today, across Africa. From South Africa's townships to Ghana's remote villages, from Nigeria's bustling cities to the rural communities of Kenya and Tanzania. Every year, thousands of people fall victim to spiritual attacks that begin with a simple gift from a stranger. The statistics are staggering. In Nigeria alone, an estimated 15 children have been abandoned or killed due to witchcraft accusations. In Ghana, hundreds of women live in witch camp sanctuaries where they flee after being accused of supernatural crimes. South Africa reports multiple Muti murders, monthly ritual killings where human body parts are harvested for traditional medicine while the victim is still alive. But what makes tonight's stories truly terrifying isn't the scale of the violence, it's how it begins. A friendly stranger offering help, a traditional healer promising prosperity, a gift that seems too good to refuse. These are the entry points into a world where spiritual warfare isn't metaphorical, it's literal, violent, and often fatal. In African spiritual traditions, objects carry power. A bracelet isn't just jewelry, it can be a conduit for spiritual energy. Medicine isn't just healing herbs, it can contain the essence of human souls. Money isn't just currency, it can be charged with supernatural forces that drain your life force with every penny you spend. This is why, across dozens of African cultures, the same warning echoes through generations. Never accept gifts from strangers. Because in Africa, strangers don't just want your money or your possessions, they want your life force, your spiritual energy, your very soul. The traditional healers known as sangomas in South Africa, witch doctors in West Africa, or inyangas across the continent are the gatekeepers of this power. But not all of them use it for healing. Some use it for harm, and they've learned that the most effective way to attack someone spiritually is through an object that the victim willingly accepts. Tonight's stories will take you inside this hidden world. You'll meet people who accepted gifts from strangers and paid the ultimate price. You'll learn about traditional healers who use human body parts in their medicines. You'll discover how entire communities can turn against individuals based on accusations of witchcraft, and you'll understand why. In Africa, paranoia isn't a mental illness, it's a survival mechanism. These stories come from police reports, medical records, court documents, and witness testimonies. They're not urban legends or folklore. They're documented cases that reveal a terrifying truth. In Africa's spiritual landscape, accepting the wrong gift from the wrong person can literally cost you your life. So before we begin, remember this. In the African spiritual world, nothing is free. Every gift comes with a price, and sometimes that price is everything you have. Dr. Mutelemwa Yusuf had the perfect setup. A professional office on Loop Street in Cape Town, complete with a receptionist, a computer, and a carefully crafted persona as a traditional healer who could solve any problem. For a 70, about 12, he promised to cure everything from bad luck to broken hearts, from unemployment to infertility. What his clients didn't know was that Dr. Yusuf wasn't South African. He was one of hundreds of unemployed foreign nationals who had discovered that South Africa's deep belief in traditional healing made for a lucrative business opportunity. All he needed was a dark room, some herbs, and the ability to convince desperate people that their problems could be solved with the right spiritual intervention. Marcus had been struggling to find work for 8 months when his cousin told him about the traditional healer on Loop Street. A recent university graduate with a degree in engineering, Marcus had sent out dozens of resumes without getting a single callback. His savings were dwindling, his girlfriend was losing patience, and his family was starting to whisper about whether he was cursed. Maybe it's time to try a traditional approach, his cousin suggested. Western education is good, but sometimes you need African solutions for African problems. The waiting room looked like any other medical office, except for the strong smell of burning herbs that seemed to seep through the walls. Marcus paid his consultation fee and was led into Yusuf's office, a pitch-black room where disembodied voices claimed to be his ancestors speaking through the healer. Yusuf's diagnosis was swift and terrifying. Marcus wasn't unemployed because of the economy or lack of experience. He was cursed. A close family friend had placed a powerful spell on him to prevent his success. The curse was so strong that no amount of job applications would ever work. Western medicine couldn't help him. Only traditional intervention could break the spiritual chains that bound him. But breaking the curse would require more than just herbs and prayers. Yusuf needed specific ingredients to create the most powerful counter-curse possible. Marcus would need to bring 2 goats, a white African hen, and various food items to appease his angry ancestors. The total cost would be 12,000, about 2,000, nearly everything Marcus had left in his savings account. But first, Yusuf said, reaching into a leather pouch, "You must wear this." The bracelet looked innocuous enough, just woven fibers and small bones. But Yusuf explained that it contained powerful protective medicine that would shield Marcus from further spiritual attacks while they prepared the main ritual. Marcus must wear it at all times, never removing it, not even to shower. Marcus hesitated. The rational part of his mind, the part shaped by years of Western education, screamed that this was nonsense, but the desperate part of his mind, the part worn down by months of rejection and failure, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this could work. He put on the bracelet. Within 48 hours, Marcus was in the hospital. The symptoms started with severe skin irritation around the bracelet. Then came the fever, the vomiting, the hallucinations. By the time his girlfriend found him collapsed in his apartment, Marcus was delirious, speaking in languages no one recognized, clawing at his skin until it bled. The emergency room doctors were baffled. Marcus's blood work showed traces of several unknown substances. The bracelet, when finally removed, revealed a horrific secret. Woven into the innocent-looking fibers were fragments of human bone, animal remains, and a cocktail of toxic plant materials that had been slowly poisoning Marcus through skin contact. But the physical symptoms were only the beginning. Even after the bracelet was removed and the toxins cleared from his system, Marcus wasn't the same. He became paranoid, convinced that people were watching him, that his food was being poisoned, that his reflection in mirrors was wrong somehow. He stopped looking for work entirely, stopped leaving his apartment, stopped communicating with friends and family. The doctors called it a psychological break triggered by poisoning. His family called it what it was, a curse that had successfully destroyed their son's mind and spirit. Meanwhile, Dr. Mutalemwa Yusuf continued operating his practice on Loop Street. When investigators finally tracked him down, they discovered that he had never received any traditional healing training. He was simply an unemployed immigrant who had learned that desperate South Africans would pay good money for spiritual solutions to their problems. But here's what makes this story truly terrifying. Yusuf wasn't unique. Investigators found dozens of similar operations across Cape Town and Johannesburg. Foreign nationals and local con artists had discovered that they could make substantial money by exploiting people's spiritual beliefs. They would offer cursed objects disguised as protective charms, poisoned medicines disguised as healing potions, and destructive rituals disguised as spiritual cleansing. The authorities shut down Yusuf's operation, but the damage was already done. Marcus never fully recovered. Years later, he remains convinced that he's under spiritual attack, unable to hold down a job or maintain relationships. The bracelet may have been removed, but the curse, psychological or supernatural, continues to control his life. The most disturbing part of this case isn't the fake healer or the poisoned bracelet. It's how easily it could have been prevented. Marcus knew the basic rule that every African child learns: never accept spiritual objects from strangers. But desperation made him ignore his instincts. He wanted to believe that someone could solve his problems with magic. That moment of weakness, the decision to accept a gift from a spiritual stranger, destroyed his life more thoroughly than any unemployment ever could. Because in Africa's spiritual world, the most dangerous trap isn't the one that kills your body, it's the one that destroys your mind and soul, leaving you alive but forever broken. Dr. Mutalemwa Yusuf may have been a fake Sangoma, but the power to destroy lives through cursed gifts, that turned out to be very, very real. Early in 2000, South African police raided a house in Pretoria that would haunt investigators for years to come. Acting on a tip from a car hijacker who had been captured, officers entered what appeared to be the home of a traditional healer, a Sangoma whose services included protection spells, love potions, and healing medicines. What they found instead was evidence of one of the most disturbing multi-murder operations ever documented in South Africa. 3 ceramic pots sat in the sangoma's ritual room, carefully arranged according to traditional spiritual practices. The pots were decorated with beadwork, whistles, skin bangles, and other ritualistic objects. To an untrained eye, they looked like typical traditional healing implements, the kind of spiritual tools that thousands of legitimate healers use across South Africa every day. But these pots contained human skulls. Dr. Marina Stain from the University of Pretoria's Department of Anatomy was called in to examine the contents. What she discovered revealed the horrifying reality of murder ritual killings, where human body parts are harvested while the victim is still alive, then used to create traditional medicines believed to possess supernatural power. The first pot contained the skull of a young white adult male. The second held the remains of a juvenile of African descent. Inside the pots, mixed with the human remains, investigators found coins, bullets, stones, and various animal bones, all carefully selected for their spiritual significance in traditional healing practices. But the skull pots were just the beginning. As investigators dug deeper into the case, they uncovered a network of suppliers, clients, and middlemen who had been operating a human body parts business for years. The Sangoma wasn't just a killer, he was a dealer in the most taboo commodity imaginable: human flesh prepared for spiritual purposes. The victims had been murdered according to specific ritualistic requirements. In murder, the victim must be alive when the body parts are removed. The pain and terror of the victim are believed to increase the spiritual potency of the resulting medicine. Death usually comes from blood loss, but not before the victim has endured unimaginable suffering. This wasn't random violence or serial killing for psychological gratification. This was business, cold, calculated, and terrifyingly organized. Here's how the operation worked. Clients would approach the Sangoma with problems that required the most powerful spiritual intervention possible. Perhaps they wanted to ensure success in business, or protection from enemies, or supernatural power over their rivals. The Sangoma would explain that such powerful results required the most potent medicine available, made from human body parts. The client wouldn't directly request murder. Instead, they would simply agree to pay the extraordinary fee required for this level of spiritual intervention, sometimes tens of thousands of rands for a single treatment. The Sangoma would then arrange for the procurement of the necessary ingredients. Professional killers would be hired to target specific types of victims. Children were particularly prized because their innocence was believed to make their body parts more spiritually potent. The killers received detailed instructions about which parts to harvest and how to ensure the victim remained alive during the mutilation process. The harvested parts would then be processed by the Sangoma using traditional preparation methods passed down through generations of healers' techniques originally developed for animal and plant medicines, now applied to human remains. The resulting muti would be sold to clients as medicine capable of producing miraculous results. What makes this case particularly disturbing is how it perverted legitimate traditional healing practices. Real Sangomas, authentic traditional healers, do use animal parts, plant materials, and mineral substances in their medicines. These practices have been part of African healing traditions for thousands of years and, in many cases, have proven medicinal value. But murder represents the absolute corruption of these traditions. It takes the sacred relationship between healer and patient, between spiritual practice and community welfare, and transforms it into something monstrous. A system where human beings are literally consumed for the spiritual benefit of others. The Pretoria case revealed that such operations weren't isolated incidents. Police investigations uncovered evidence of a thriving market in human body parts across South Africa. Traditional healers in rural areas were being approached by urban clients willing to pay enormous sums for the most powerful muti possible. Some healers refused these requests, others saw an opportunity for unprecedented profit. The most disturbing aspect of the investigation was discovering how clients found these services. It wasn't through underground criminal networks or dark web marketplaces. It was through word of mouth in communities where belief in traditional healing was strong. A businesswoman desperate for success would mention her problems to a friend. The friend would know someone who had used a particularly powerful healer. That healer would assess the client's needs and, if they seemed wealthy enough, would mention that the most effective solutions required special ingredients. The client never explicitly requested human sacrifice. They simply agreed to pay whatever was necessary for guaranteed results. The moral responsibility for what happened next was carefully diffused across a chain of intermediaries, making it easy for clients to convince themselves that they weren't really responsible for the murders that funded their spiritual solutions. By the time police shut down the Pretoria operation, investigators estimated that the Sangoma had been operating for years. The 2 skulls found in the pots were likely just the most recent victims. Evidence suggested that dozens of people, mostly children and young adults, had been murdered to supply the demand for human-based muti. The case sent shockwaves through South Africa's traditional healing community. Legitimate healers were horrified that their sacred practices had been perverted for such evil purposes. But it also revealed an uncomfortable truth. In a society where traditional healing is widely accepted and respected, it becomes easier for criminals to exploit those beliefs for profit. Today, muti murders continue to occur across South Africa and neighboring countries. Police estimate that approximately 1 case is reported per month, though many more likely go undetected. The trade in human body parts remains active, fueled by clients who believe that supernatural power can be purchased and consumed. The pots from the Pretoria case are now stored as evidence in police facilities. But somewhere in South Africa, other pots are being prepared, other victims are being selected, and other clients are paying for medicines that require the ultimate sacrifice from strangers they will never meet. Because in the world of muti murder, the most powerful gifts don't come from the healer's generosity. They come from taking everything life, suffering, and soul from innocent victims who had the misfortune of crossing paths with those who traffic in human spiritual essence. Akua was 67 years old when her own granddaughter accused her of witchcraft. The accusation came 3 days after the child died from malaria in their village in northern Ghana. As the family gathered to mourn, 5-year-old Ama, the dead child's sister, pointed directly at her grandmother and spoke the words that would destroy Akua's life forever. "Grandmother flew at night and sucked out my sister's soul." In many parts of the world, such an accusation from a grieving child would be dismissed as trauma-induced confusion. But in northern Ghana, where witchcraft beliefs are woven into the fabric of daily life, a child's testimony carries devastating weight. Especially when that child claims to have witnessed their grandmother transforming into a bird and stealing their sister's life force through supernatural means. Within hours, Akua's entire community had turned against her. Neighbors who had known her for decades suddenly recalled suspicious incidents. The time her garden produced better crops than others during a drought, the way animals seemed to avoid her compound, the fact that she had lived so long while younger people died. Every piece of coincidental evidence was reinterpreted as proof of her supernatural malevolence. The village chief called an emergency meeting. Traditional elders examined the circumstances of the child's death, consulted spiritual advisors, and reached a unanimous conclusion. Akua was indeed a witch who had murdered her own granddaughter through spiritual means. The penalty for such evil was immediate banishment or death. But Akua was given a third option: exile to Gambaga witch camp. The concept of witch camps is unique to Ghana, though similar sanctuaries exist in other West African countries. These are settlements where women accused of witchcraft can seek refuge from communities that want them dead. Located in remote areas of northern Ghana, the camps house hundreds of women who have been driven from their homes by accusations of supernatural evil. Gambaga is the largest and oldest of these camps, established over a century ago under the protection of a local chief who declared his territory neutral ground for accused witches. The women who live there exist in a strange limbo, neither free nor imprisoned, neither guilty nor innocent, neither alive nor dead in the eyes of their former communities. Akua arrived at Gambaga with nothing but the clothes she wore. Like all new residents, she was required to undergo a purification ritual overseen by the camp's traditional authorities. The process was designed to neutralize any supernatural power she might possess and ensure she couldn't harm other residents or nearby communities. The ritual involved drinking a concoction made from roots, herbs, and sacred water, while camp elders performed incantations to bind her spiritual abilities. If she was truly a witch, they explained, the medicine would either kill her or strip away her powers. If she survived and showed no signs of supernatural activity, she would be allowed to stay under the chief's protection. Akua survived the ritual, but survival came with a price. She was assigned a small mud hut with a leaking roof and told that she could remain in the camp indefinitely as long as she worked in the chief's fields without pay, followed strict behavioral rules, and never attempted to contact her family or return to her village. The living conditions at Gambaga were deliberately harsh. The women survived on minimal food rations, had no access to electricity or running water, and received almost no medical care. They worked from dawn to dusk in agricultural fields, with their labor serving as payment for the protection the chief provided. Many were elderly women like Akua struggling to perform backbreaking physical work in Ghana's brutal heat. But the physical hardships were nothing compared to the psychological torture of permanent exile. Akua knew she would never see her surviving grandchildren again, never participate in family celebrations, never be buried in her ancestral lands. She had been erased from her own life, declared spiritually dead while her body remained alive. Years passed at Gambaga. Akua learned the stories of other women in the camp, hundreds of tales of accusation, exile, and despair. There was Fatima, accused of witchcraft after her husband died in a farming accident. There was Salamatu, banished when a business rival's shop burned down. There was Adiza, sent to the camp after her daughter-in-law failed to become pregnant. What united all these women wasn't evidence of supernatural power, but rather their vulnerability. Most were elderly widows without male protection, women who had accumulated small amounts of property that relatives wanted to inherit, or individuals who had somehow angered influential community members. The witchcraft accusations were often convenient ways to eliminate inconvenient people. But the most disturbing aspect of the witch camps wasn't the conditions or the false accusations. It was how the system perpetuated itself through the seemingly generous act of accepting cursed gifts from strangers. Camp residents were forbidden from leaving Gambaga's boundaries, but they were allowed to receive visitors and gifts from the outside world. Well-meaning humanitarian organizations, foreign donors, and sympathetic Ghanaians would occasionally visit the camp, bringing food, clothing, and small amounts of money to help the exiled women. What these donors didn't understand was how such gifts were perceived within the traditional belief system that had created the camps in the first place. To many Ghanaians, the fact that these women could attract sympathy and support from strangers was itself evidence of supernatural manipulation. How else could such obviously evil individuals inspire charitable feelings in good people? The gifts became proof of the women's continued spiritual power. Instead of demonstrating their innocence, the kindness of strangers was reinterpreted as evidence that the accused witches were using supernatural influence to manipulate their benefactors. Each donated meal, each piece of clothing, each act of compassion strengthened the community's conviction that these women were indeed dangerous supernatural entities who should never be allowed to return home. Akua experienced this firsthand when a group of European tourists visited Gambaga and were moved by her story. They left her with 200 Ghana cedis, about 50, to help improve her living conditions. When word of this gift reached her original village, family members who had been considering her return became even more convinced that she was using witchcraft to manipulate foreigners into giving her money. The gift that was meant to help her had actually sealed her fate. She would never go home. In 2015, the same year Akua received the tourists' money, Ghana's government announced plans to close all witch camps and reintegrate the women into their communities. Officials declared that the camps were violations of human rights and incompatible with modern governance. But the announcement revealed the government's fundamental misunderstanding of the problem. The camps weren't the cause of witchcraft persecution, they were the symptom. The real issue was the widespread belief in supernatural evil that made communities willing to exile their own members based on accusations alone. When government officials visited Gambaga to explain the closure plans, they encountered fierce resistance not from camp authorities, but from the women themselves. Many residents begged to be allowed to stay, explaining that returning to their communities would mean almost certain death. They had heard stories of accused witches who tried to go home only to be murdered by relatives who remained convinced of their supernatural guilt. Akua was among those who pleaded to remain in the camp. "If I go back to my village," she told officials, "my own family will kill me. Here, I am safe. There, I am dead." The government's resettlement program proceeded anyway, but with mixed results. Some women were successfully reintegrated into their communities, especially when traditional leaders were convinced to perform cleansing rituals that officially declared them innocent of witchcraft charges. But others faced continued persecution, violence, or rebanishment. Akua never found out what would have happened to her if she had attempted to return home. She died at Gambaga in 2016, still in exile, still declared a witch, still paying the price for accepting the kindness of strangers in a world where such kindness was seen as evidence of supernatural manipulation. Her story reveals the most insidious aspect of spiritual persecution, how acts of human compassion can be transformed into evidence of supernatural evil. In societies where witchcraft beliefs are strong, there is literally no way for accused individuals to prove their innocence. Every gift they receive, every act of kindness shown to them, every sign of sympathy for their plight becomes additional proof of their spiritual power to manipulate others. The gift that tourists gave Akua wasn't cursed by traditional magic or supernatural forces. It was cursed by the belief system that interpreted generosity as evidence of evil, kindness as proof of manipulation, and human compassion as supernatural corruption. That curse proved more powerful than any traditional magic because it transformed the very acts meant to help her into weapons used against her, and in the end, it kept her in exile until the day she died. The rumors started in Dakar on a hot January morning in 2010, spreading through the bustling markets and crowded neighborhoods faster than any virus. A stranger driving a white SUV was approaching people on the street, offering them money, alms, charitable gifts to help with their daily struggles. But everyone who accepted the stranger's generosity was found dead within hours, their bodies showing no signs of violence, their faces frozen in expressions of absolute terror. By noon, the entire city was gripped by panic. The story was always the same. A well-dressed man in an expensive vehicle would approach someone who looked poor or struggling. He would offer them cash, sometimes just a few thousand CFA francs, sometimes larger amounts, claiming he wanted to share his good fortune with those less blessed. The recipients would gratefully accept the money, thank their generous benefactor, and watch him drive away. Then they would die. Aminata Diallo was buying vegetables in the Sandaga market when she first heard the story from her friend Fatou, who worked at a nearby restaurant. "My cousin's neighbor accepted money from a stranger yesterday morning," Fatou whispered, glancing around nervously. "They found her dead in her courtyard last night. The money was still in her hand, but her body was cold as ice." Aminata laughed nervously. "That's impossible. Money can't kill people." But Fatou's expression remained deadly serious. "The imam says it's not the money itself, it's what the stranger put into it. Evil spirits. Curses. The man is a marabout, a spiritual worker, and he's harvesting souls for some terrible purpose." As the day progressed, more stories emerged. A street vendor near the university had accepted 50 francs from a man in a white SUV and was found dead an hour later, blood coming from his ears and nose. A grandmother walking to the mosque had taken money for her grandchildren and collapsed before she could reach home. A young man struggling to pay for his mother's medicine had gratefully accepted the stranger's gift and was discovered dead in an alley, the cursed bills scattered around his body. What made the rumors particularly terrifying was their specificity. Multiple witnesses described the same vehicle, a white SUV with tinted windows and no visible license plate. The same type of man, well-dressed, middle-aged, speaking perfect Wolof with a slight accent that suggested he wasn't originally from Dakar. The same pattern, generous gifts, followed by mysterious deaths within hours. By evening, the rumors had evolved into something even more sinister. The stranger wasn't just killing people randomly, he was collecting souls for a specific purpose. Some said he was working for politicians who needed supernatural power for upcoming elections. Others claimed he was gathering spiritual energy for wealthy businessmen who wanted to ensure their success. The most frightening theory was that he was preparing for a massive ritual that would require hundreds of souls, and Dakar was just his hunting ground. Radio stations began broadcasting warnings, telling people to refuse all gifts from strangers. Mosques announced special prayers for protection against spiritual attacks. Traditional healers offered charms and amulets guaranteed to neutralize cursed money. The government issued official statements calling the rumors unfounded superstition, but even police officers were reportedly refusing to handle any money found near suspicious deaths. The panic reached its peak when a respected businessman named Omar Bar claimed to have encountered the deadly stranger himself. Bar was leaving his office in the Plateau district when a man in a white SUV pulled up beside him and rolled down the window. "Brother," the stranger called out, holding up a thick roll of bills. "Allah has blessed me with great fortune today. Let me share it with you." Bar's first instinct was to accept the gift. He was a devout Muslim who believed in the virtue of accepting charity, but something about the stranger's eyes made him hesitate. They were too bright, too intense, almost luminous in the dim evening light. "Thank you, brother," Bar replied carefully, "but I don't need your money. Give it to someone who truly requires Allah's help." The stranger's expression changed immediately. The friendly smile disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "You would refuse Allah's generosity?" he asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I would accept Allah's generosity," Bar responded, "but I'm not sure that's what you're offering." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other through the SUV's window. Then the stranger smiled again, but this time the expression never reached his eyes. "Very wise," he said. "Very wise indeed." The SUV pulled away, leaving Bar standing on the sidewalk with his heart pounding. When he told this story at the mosque that evening, it confirmed everyone's worst fears. The deadly stranger was real. He was hunting in Dakar, and only those with strong spiritual protection could resist his cursed gifts. The rumors spread beyond Senegal within days. Reports of similar incidents emerged from Gambia, where a man in a white SUV was allegedly offering deadly arms to people near the border. Mali reported cases of mysterious deaths following encounters with generous strangers. Even as far away as Morocco, people began refusing gifts from unfamiliar vehicles. But then, as suddenly as they had begun, the rumors stopped. No new deaths were reported. No more sightings of the white SUV. The mysterious stranger seemed to have vanished as quickly as he had appeared, leaving behind only fear, suspicion, and a transformed relationship between strangers and gifts throughout West Africa. Researchers who later studied the deadly arms phenomenon discovered something both fascinating and terrifying. There was no evidence that anyone had actually died from accepting cursed money. Medical examinations of bodies that families claimed were victims of the deadly stranger showed natural causes of death, heart attacks, strokes, undiagnosed medical conditions. The timing that seemed so supernatural was simply coincidence. But the lack of supernatural deaths didn't mean the rumors were harmless. The panic had created real victims, people who refused medical aid from unfamiliar charities, families who rejected legitimate assistance because they feared spiritual contamination, children who were taught to distrust any act of kindness from strangers. The most disturbing discovery was how the rumors had mutated as they spread. Each retelling added new details, new fears, new restrictions on human generosity. What began as a story about one mysterious stranger had evolved into a comprehensive belief system that portrayed all unexpected gifts as potentially deadly spiritual weapons. Dr. Julien Bonhomme, an anthropologist who studied the deadly arms rumors, concluded that they reflected deeper anxieties about modernity, inequality, and the changing nature of social relationships in urban Africa. In traditional village communities, everyone knew everyone else. Gifts came from known quantities, relatives, neighbors, friends. But in bustling cities like Dakar, strangers were everywhere and their motivations were unknowable. The deadly arms rumors transformed this urban anxiety into a supernatural threat. They provided a spiritual explanation for economic inequality. The wealthy stranger who could afford to give away money must be gaining his wealth through supernatural means, and a cultural defense against unwanted social change. Traditional people should be suspicious of modern generosity, but understanding the social function of the rumors doesn't diminish their power to shape behavior. Years after the deadly arms panic ended, many West Africans remained deeply suspicious of unexpected gifts from strangers. The rumor may have been false, but the fear it created was real and permanent. Aminata Diallo, the woman who first heard the story in Sandaga Market, never forgot the lesson. Even now, more than a decade later, she refuses to accept money, food, or gifts from people she doesn't know personally. Her children have been taught the same caution, and they're teaching it to their children. "You never know," she explains when asked about her continued vigilance. Maybe those specific rumors weren't true, but the danger they warned about, that's still real. In Africa, you must always be careful about gifts from strangers, because once you accept something cursed, there's no way to give it back. The deadly arms of Dakar may have been products of collective imagination, but they revealed a fundamental truth about spiritual warfare in modern Africa. Sometimes the most powerful curses aren't cast by traditional healers or supernatural forces. They're created by fear itself, spreading through communities like a contagion, transforming natural human generosity into a weapon of mutual suspicion. And in a world where trust has been weaponized, every gift becomes potentially deadly not because of the magic it contains, but because of the fear it awakens. These stories span different countries, different decades, and different types of spiritual attack. But they all share one terrifying common thread. They begin with a moment of acceptance. A decision to trust, a willingness to believe that a stranger's gift might solve your problems or ease your burdens. From the fake Sangoma's poison bracelet in Cape Town to the Muti Hunter's ritual implements in Pretoria, from the humanitarian gifts that trapped women in Ghana's witch camps to the rumored deadly arms of Dakar, each horror began when someone accepted something they should have refused. This isn't coincidence. In African spiritual traditions, acceptance creates a spiritual contract. When you willingly take something from another person, you open a channel between your soul and theirs. If that person means you harm, that channel becomes a conduit for spiritual attack. Traditional African wisdom teaches that there are only 3 reasons why a stranger would offer you a gift. They're genuinely generous, rare, they want something from you in return, common, or they mean to harm you, terrifying. The problem is that from the outside, these 3 motivations look exactly the same. That's why, across dozens of African cultures and hundreds of languages, the same warning echoes through generations: never accept gifts from strangers. Because in Africa's spiritual landscape, the most dangerous predators don't hunt with weapons or violence. They hunt with generosity, kindness, and the basic human desire to help those in need. The documented cases we've explored tonight reveal that this ancient wisdom isn't superstition, it's survival strategy. Whether the danger comes from poisoned objects, ritual murder, spiritual manipulation, or mass hysteria, the result is the same. Accepting the wrong gift from the wrong person can destroy your life, your sanity, or your soul. But perhaps the most terrifying lesson from these stories is how easy it is to become a victim. None of our subjects were naive or gullible. Marcus was an educated engineer. The Muti clients were successful business people. Akua was a respected grandmother. The people of Dakar were sophisticated urbanites. Yet all of them fell victim to spiritual attacks that began with gifts from strangers. In the modern world, we're taught to see suspicion of generosity as paranoia, rejection of help as prideful, and distrust of strangers as antisocial. But in Africa, these attitudes can be the difference between life and death, sanity and madness, freedom and spiritual enslavement. So, the next time you find yourself in an African village, market, or city, and a friendly stranger offers you something, anything, remember these stories. Remember Marcus's poisoned bracelet, the Muti hunter's skull-filled pots, Akua's exile to the witch camps, and the deadly arms that terrorized Dakar. Remember that in Africa, gifts aren't just objects, they're spiritual contracts. And some contracts, once signed in acceptance, can never be broken. No matter how genuine the smile, how urgent your need, or how generous the offer, sometimes the only safe response to a stranger's gift is a polite but firm refusal. Because in Africa's spiritual battlefield, the most dangerous weapon isn't a curse or a spell. It's your own willingness to say yes.